Hi, everybody. My name is Nina Gruber. I work here at Local First Arizona, and I am the senior manager of the Arizona Economic Resource Center. We are a program of Local First Arizona. Local First broadly does a lot of work to support local economies throughout the state of Arizona. Our team here is focused on rural Arizona in particular, and we have a particular focus in grant pursuits and supporting grant pursuit capacity for organizations across the state. And so to do that, we have seen quite a few different needs bubble up through our time here, working with the Resource Center, and really wanted to address that by starting this workshop series where we are trying to highlight and utilize the subject matter expertise of our amazing contractors that we work with to really build on the skill sets for entities across Arizona so that folks can continue to pursue and win grants um, as well as just continuing to build capacity for organizations in general. So thank you all for being here. This is being recorded, as the robot voice let you know, and we will be making sure that you get these recordings, and anything like that, we will be posting it on Local First Local Learning Lab, which is a part of our website that has a bunch of different resources for different businesses and organizations to seek out some guidance from subject matter experts. With that, I will pass this over to John Luther, who is part of Good Creations LLC. He is one of our most prolific grant writers on our contracting team and has a wonderful success rate and experience across the state, and I'm certain beyond, working on federal grants, private grants, and really everything in between with clientele from all over the state of Arizona. And so it's with that, I will pass it over to John and we can get this workshop started.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Robin. And to everybody at the AZERC. And congratulations on eclipsing $150 million raised. Fantastic news. And so fortunate to join you all on a Tuesday. Hope you had a great holiday weekend. Today, we will be talking about securing matching funds, and also the mechanics of matching funds. It's something that definitely ties into sustainability. It's a very timely topic. It's one of the more frequent questions that get asked nowadays, especially with the funding landscape. How does it work? So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive here. And if you do have questions on any particular slide, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Robin and Nina, they're going to be keeping an eye on the chat. And before we transition to a future slide, we may be addressing the questions that you do drop in the chat. So that's how it's going to work today. Like Nina said, my name is John Luther. I do grants at really every level of government, including private, and they certainly do all go together. So, and match is a very important component of that. So let's go to the next slide here, talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Obviously, what matching funds are, why funders require them, and how they're kind of pushing you towards a more sustainable project or sustainable operations in general, match rates and requirements, the different kinds of match. Also, what is a capital stack? We'll be talking about capital stacks and programmatic stacks, and how match really ties into your overall organizational readiness, and just how to really put the whole thing together so that you have a successful and competitive grant proposal. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So obviously, we are in a very competitive landscape for fundraising. Match is one of the pieces that communicate to a funder, to a proposal reviewer, that your project and your agency in general is competitive, that you have additional buy-in from funders, community sources. Projects with demonstrated match typically score higher, and that's sometimes built into the rubric of a grant review, but sometimes it is not. It still is something that is highly leveraged for scoring. The way that funders look at it is they're trying to see, are we the only source that is being approached for this project in terms of fundraising? Is everything on our shoulders? So they're looking to see, are you reducing their risk in entering the project in a fundraising capacity? Funders do want shared investment and commitment. They want to see that there's buy-in elsewhere in the community or with other funders. And typically match allows you to leverage those dollars to go after larger funding, whether that's at the federal level, the state level, or elsewhere. Next slide. Many federal and state grants, they are requiring match. They have a, depending on whichever opportunity you are going for and applying for, there may be a certain formula, certain percentage. Readiness is how they frame the utility of match, and then match really does show that that you have partnerships, that you've put some planning into your program, and that communicates a level of successfulness in administering the project moving forward. Sustainability is one of the keywords that we're hearing nowadays, especially for nonprofits, but certainly for municipalities. And layered funding, meaning funding that derives from various levels of government or private, that creates a stronger long-term project overall. Really, the bottom line here is that for large programmatic types of requests, and certainly capital projects, the match may be the bridge that allows that project to go from conceptual to actual and to be implemented in the community. Next slide. So we've heard match funds referred to as a lot of things. Most commonly, it will be called match, required match. It's also called cost share. A little less frequently do we call it leveraged funds, but also in RFPs and RFGAs, you will hear it referred to as non-federal share and local match. So matching contributions can come from all levels of government, and we'll discuss a little bit later about how those things work together. They can be local government, foundation, they can be cash reserves, they can be sponsorships. We'll also dive a little bit more into in-kind match, which involves volunteer labor, donated professional services, the use of equipment, facility use, and staff time. Next slide. Funders are using matching requirements to spread financial risk around to ensure that there is local buy-in, but then also public dollars. These originate from taxpayer dollars. They want to make sure that that investment is being leveraged in the greatest capacity possible. They want to spread out they want to stretch out those public dollars and their impact. They want to verify your capacity as an organization to deliver on this project and to encourage partnerships and sustainability. Bottom line here, and I think this is more implicit than anything else, funders are looking for who else believes in this project, who has put their money where their mouth is, and why should we jump in on this project? So federal guidance on match, a statute that you may regularly see, especially with federal grants, is 2 CFR 200 types of statutes, and those are related to cost sharing. Federal guidance, it's in the writ of the law. Typically, it has to be an allowable type of match. It needs to be verifiable. It needs to be necessary and specific to the project. And documentation is huge. You must properly document it. You need to discuss your ability to show proper documentation and compliance. And typically, you cannot, in all circumstances, you cannot double dip on match. So that goes into just being specific to the project in general. They want to make sure that the match dollars that you are proposing are used only by this project, and you're not going to run into any complications over the course of the project period, however long that may be. Next slide. So let's talk about how match rates work. I have some examples here, and many of you all might have applied to some of these opportunities. So you may have seen some of these percentages before. These are kind of some usual suspects that we see for nonprofits and for municipalities in relation to federal grants as well as state grants. Um, Congressionally directed spending, CDS. Those are submitted through the offices of Senators Gallego and Kelly. The way that works, and these are typically for capital projects that you're applying for, they have a different match amount based on the account that you are applying for. So if you have a community facilities type of project, they are going to say, well, then the account that your project is specific to is probably USDA community facilities. That has typically a 20 to 25% match for transportation projects, for wastewater projects that involves the Army Corps of Engineers. That can have a 50% match up to 25% match based on the project type. More frequently, we see a 25% match with 75% grant from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then for ADOT transportation projects, this is the standard formula. They will cover about 94.3% of the total project cost is typically covered by ADOT, where they require a 5.7% local match. Now, Arizona State Parks, and this is kind of a tricky one, through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, you would assume that it is a state grant, but those are actually federal pass-through dollars. And so they are classified as federal. We'll go into that a little bit later, but they require 50% match for programs like Land and Water Conservation Fund. Something important is that funders may adjust or they may waive altogether match rates based on county economic conditions, local economic conditions. There's a number of tools that are typically called out in the application and the RFGA, where you can look at census data. And if your locality, if your county is severely distressed or classified in a certain way, you may have reduced or waived match altogether. Next slide. So yeah, building on what we said at the last slide, there could be economic categories that exempt you from match or greatly reduce it. This is also true for WIFA as well. Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of Arizona. Is your locality, your town, your city, or your county, are you distressed, at risk? Colonia designation is something that also plays into this, especially for USDA. And based on the economic conditions of your community, that is a variable that certainly, not always, but very frequently plays into your match percentage that you are required to bring to the table. Higher need communities, that is something that is still looked at and is also kind of brought into the frame for federal grants as well. So always review program-specific match formulas. Working with rural communities, especially through the AZERC, that is something that 50% or about that kind of clip, do we see that match waivers may be in the mix, and that's certainly helpful for rural communities. Next slide. Now let's get into the different types of match. Cash match is the most common that we see. Cash match could be a donation that you have previously received from a private foundation, a community foundation, a sponsorship, something of the sort, cash reserves. Next slide. Now, whereas cash match is very straightforward, and that's why it is probably the most preferred. In-kind match is something that is accepted, but it becomes much more complex, especially when you're dealing with federal types of opportunities. And we'll get into the documentation and the compliance of that later. But examples of in-kind match could include volunteer labor, which is something that we see with nonprofit agencies, engineering services, which is much more straightforward, that can typically be documented by a quote or a bid, donated land for capital projects that you're going vertical on, meeting space, facility use is another way to frame that, equipment use, and training support. And I saw that we had a question in the chat.
Yeah, so we had a question. So from Carnell Martin, thank you for your question. This is a little bit more broad as opposed to the type of match, so we could save it for later. But what are the best strategies and grant opportunities for launching a workforce development pilot program? And there's some more details about that particular program. Do we want to address that maybe towards the end, John?
Yeah, let's discuss that at the end, and we can dive into the mechanics of that particular opportunity. It sounds like you're also looking for the best opportunity for funding, so we can address that towards the end if that's all right.
Perfect.
Awesome, thanks, Carnell. And then next slide. So common in-kind match examples. We discussed the types of in-kind that are frequently leveraged in the last slide. What that looks like in a more granular sense here is, contributions from professionals that can include attorney services, engineer services. Once you get into staff, you do need to have a sense of hourly rates. They need to be reasonable and have a kind of a fair market rate comparison. Also for donated services, this is true for municipalities, cities, and towns. What I see most often is if you have a capital project, and you have a robust public works department who's able to do quite a bit of the project, whether that is demo, site work, concrete pouring, you name it. What I find works best is to have a comparison for fair market rate. Cities and towns, they will typically put out a project sort of in a bid capacity as a whole. They will receive a response from a GC, a general contractor, a construction group. And in that overall bid for the project, there can be line items related to the things that they say to themselves, well, we can do that in-house. We've got a backhoe. We can do site work, earthwork. We can maybe do plumbing, stub a few pipes. If you have documentation that this is what it costs in the market, in the general market conditions in your community, and this is what a professional would charge, that's typically what funders are going to use and say, well, this is the value of those services, of those activities. And that goes to the key point here. Documentation matters as much as the contribution itself. If you do not have a way to document the in-kind value of those activities, that's going to be very difficult for you, and it may not be accepted by the funder. Next slide. So we called this slide "Know Before You Go." This addresses the complexity of match, and it seems very straightforward, but we see agencies, cities, and towns kind of get caught up in this from time to time. The rule of thumb: one funding type, so let's say federal, that's where most of the dollars are in the spread. Federal dollars cannot be used as match for the same funding type. You cannot use federal match for a federal opportunity more often than not, and almost in all cases. So what you have to do is you would have to leverage, if you were pursuing a federal opportunity, you would have to leverage state dollars. You can use county dollars. You can use city dollars, and you can especially use private dollars. So one stumbling block that I also see is that some funds administered by state agencies where it says state of Arizona, there could be, state in the title of the funding agency. Some funds that they administer are actually federal dollars, and they therefore cannot be used as matching funds for other federal dollars. One big example is Arizona State Parks, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Everything in the title of that opportunity would lead you to believe that those are state dollars. However, those are federal pass-through dollars. They apply at the national level for state parks funding, and they once they receive an award from national, they are administering those dollars, but the classification of those dollars is federal. Another one is WIFA. Again, everybody sees Arizona and they assume these are state dollars. That is not the case. For their clean water state revolving fund and their drinking water state revolving fund, those originate from federal as well. So those are classified as federal. The key point here, it would take 5 minutes or so to just call the funder or reach out to them via email just to confirm how are these dollars classified when you're building your match strategy. That is something that you can go down a very long path with an incorrect assumption, and then once you're about to press submit, you could find out that, hey, I classified this incorrectly and my whole entire match strategy is therefore incorrect and incomplete. Next paragraph, or next slide. So yeah, in competitive grants, and sometimes it's in the rubric, sometimes it isn't. Match often improves scoring or how project ready a proposal is. Leverage demonstrates momentum. Partnerships are very powerful and increase credibility for a project, whether that's programmatic or capital. And larger capital stacks, and what we mean by capital stack is, how are you putting together your $5 million project? Where are you getting your funds from? That shows project readiness as well from a fundraising perspective. So a little bit of an example, because I know that we're speaking rather conceptually here, but let's put some dollars forward and see how this kind of shakes out. We have an example where there could be a project requesting $1 million however, in example one, this $1 million request, they are going to the funder, let's say it's federal in this case, for all $1 million of the project cost, 100% they are requesting. However, in a comparable example, let's say that $1 million project they did have some support from city funds, foundation grants, they're leveraging in-kind services. I would say that it is not impossible for the first example, a 100% $1 million request from federal, assuming that it is allowable, that there is no match required. It can absolutely be awarded, but we're seeing less and less that is the case. These funders, they want to spread out these public dollars and their impact far and wide. They want to impact more communities. And so it's, again, not impossible, but it seems like every year we're seeing this happen less and less. Whereas the second example, if they are leveraging city funds, foundation grants, in-kind services, those are things that you can call out in your proposal. And you can show that this has local buy-in. This has community partners behind it. That plays into project readiness and organizational capacity. Those are things that you absolutely should leverage and call out in your narrative to score better and to convince the funder that, hey, we're far more ready than just, hey, we're going to you for every last cent of this project. Reviewers often interpret strong match as reduced project risk. That naturally answers their sustainability question. So it's one thing to simply bring the match to the table, use that to your advantage, call it out in the narrative. That's a huge asset that you would be bringing to the table. Next slide. And then for capital stacks, and capital projects are projects where you're building something. You could be building a community facility, a childcare facility, affordable housing, things of that nature. Most major projects, and we define major projects as, $5 million plus per project. These types of projects rarely rely on one grant alone. We see that most often in the affordable housing space, but for almost all other project types, they are layering their funding. And so they have a capital stack that more often than not includes some federal, sort of the largest chunk of their capital stack, but then going all the way down, they're leveraging state, local government, private foundation, and cash reserves, in-kind support, things of that nature. That is referred to as a capital stack. So just for future reference. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the research. I mentioned affordable housing there. Even for affordable housing, we're seeing that more often than not, they do have a capital stack. Between 2008 and 2019, the most recent decade of observation, 80% of California affordable housing developments use between 4 to 8 different funding sources. And some of them used more than 8 funding sources. Between 2020 to 2023, 76% of low-income housing tax credit new construction projects use 2 or more public funding sources in addition to tax credit equity. This is standard across the board, this approach to layering, and that is certainly reflected in affordable housing projects, which I would say nowadays may have the best chance at getting the bulk, if not all of your funding from one source, especially if the project is under $5 million in cost. Next slide. And here's maybe a more applicable example for a capital stack. This example is just a community resource center project. I actually just helped finalize a large $21 million community facility project. That project actually leveraged more than 40 different funders, which is not uncommon. But in this example here, we're dealing with about a $6 to $7 million project. This is the kind of spread that you'll see, and it reflects which level of funder typically has the most resources to contribute to a project. In this example, you see that federal accounts for about 30%, and then it goes down from there, right? A state grant may cover something closer to 15% or so. City contribution will typically be less, and then foundation support. These are family foundations, community foundation funders. They represent a smaller portion of the capital stack. And then to work around the edges to get you to full fundraise status, we see a lot of projects leverage in-kind services, typically engineering. There could be donated land value. And then some projects, while they don't get to fully fundraise the project from a grants perspective, there may be some debt financing in there. You want to minimize that as much as possible. So that's kind of a standard capital stack that you may see for a $7 million project. So organizational readiness, before you apply for any particular grant, it's worth a moment of reflection. And some of you know your agencies in and out. Some of you may be applying for a very large chunk of funding for the first time, and this is something that you have not encountered before. But ask yourself, do we have unrestricted resources that we can say without question are being utilized specifically for this project? That's probably question number one. General operating types of funds, when we say unrestricted, that's typically what we're talking about. If you're a city or a town, unallocated, unearmarked funds that you can leverage, typically from a general fund or something of that nature. Can we track match properly? That is a function of accounting and documentation. Sometimes it's done by the executive director. If you're a smaller nonprofit, if you have a finance department, if you're fortunate enough to have that, that's where you start talking about your capacity in that sense. Do we have committed partners for the project? Can we document in-kind support? Do we have staffing capacity? And then this all funnels down to sort of the central question here: can we sustain this project long term? Next slide. So a self-assessment activity for all the participants. I want you to try to address pick out from this list what your greatest strength is as an agency, and let's also kind of build a sense of what is our greatest weakness as an agency. What's an area where we can do better as we're talking about things like matching funds for fundraising. So existing resources, cash reserves, that is cash in general is typically the most leveraged resource that we use for matching. Volunteer support for nonprofits, that's another thing that can be leveraged. Partnership, donated space and equipment. Are you using your facility to do a program? What is the value of that? Existing grants and local government relationships. As far as capacity gaps, do you have financial systems in place to meet CFR 200 statute types of requirements? Are you able to match, are you able to track your match? So when you submit a reimbursement request, or when you're sending along communications to your funder, are you showing proper documentation and tracking? And then, and really the rest of it ties into those two things, just accounting and documentation. So just take a mental note. Where does your agency excel in terms of match readiness? What are your greatest weaknesses that you can do better on for match readiness? Next slide. And then we discussed a lot of this already. I think it's worth just one more reiteration. Public sources are defined as government types of institutions. Private sources are anything from foundations to corporate giving to sponsorships. Organizational sources, those are what you bring to the table as an agency or a nonprofit. And in-kind is defined as things that you're leveraged that don't necessarily have a cash value outright, but nonetheless have an equivalent cash value that you can reference. Volunteer labor, donated services, equipment use, so on and so forth. Next slide. So timing your match strategy, which has become a little bit more difficult. One of the trends that Robin's been discussing that the AZRC has seen over time is that these federal opportunities, they have a tighter and tighter window for submission. So although leveraging matching funds is a very important part of applying, and it's something that you have to address in your narrative and your proposed budget, you have a shorter truncated window to do those things. That is why I think the early planning is as one of the very first steps in putting together a proposal. That's something that can generate the highest return on investment in terms of success. One of the first things that I do when I look at any RFGA, any RFA, is to look through do Control F. That's a great tool. I look for match. I look for cost share. Those are the regular terms that you see. See what the percentage is. See what you have to bring to the table, and ask yourself, are we ready to do that? If we're proposing a $500,000 project and there's 20% match, do we have $100,000 to bring to the table here? If you do not, begin those partnership conversations for your kind of local groups, your United Ways, it may be like a Freeport McMoran. Is that something that you can apply to them for matching funds and leverage that for this proposal? For pre-application, before you put that together, if you do have match, find those commitment letters, bundle them, put them together, make sure that you have the exact value of those. And then for the proposal development, make sure that those numbers go together and create a full picture, a full accurate picture of your budget. And then for post-award, make sure that you are able to track those contributions, track your match, and maintain compliance records so that you are in compliance with federal or state standards. The key point here, match planning should start before the proposal is written. And that's one of the main things that you should be looking at in terms of, should we even be applying for this grant in the first place? Are we truly ready? So next slide. And spoke to this part a little bit earlier in the presentation. It's one thing to have the match. It's another thing to talk about that match and use it as a resource to score a little bit higher on your proposal. Strong grant proposals often explain the source of match, the amount, sure, but make sure that you're covering all bases here. What type of contribution is it? Classify that in the narrative. What is the timing of the commitment? Is that sufficient for the project period that you are applying for? And then really, I like to go one step further and speak to project readiness, speak to capacity, put it really in front of the reviewer that this demonstrates project readiness, your capacity overall, and the type of organization that you are. An example narrative would be, this project will leverage $500,000 in city investment, $150,000 in foundation support, and $60,000 in documented in-kind engineering services. So you're speaking to the level of classification there. Folks know where the dollars are coming from and that they are compatible with the funding that you are seeking. Next slide. Now, managing match properly. It is standard guidance that the full required match must generally be contributed during the project period. So make sure that those funds do not expire, that they must be spent by a certain time, that they are sufficient for the length of the project period. They must be documented appropriately by award letter, by contract. They must align with approved project activities. You cannot use the match dollars from a different project for another very specific project. You cannot double dip. They must meet federal allowability standards. Typical documentation, especially for in-kind expenses, include timesheets. That's one of the more annoying documentation processes that folks have to do when they are leveraging in-kind labor or volunteer. Donation letters are typically used for cash match. Financial records for things like general fund. If you're doing a transportation project and you're leveraging HERF funds, you have to show financial records for that. Volunteer logs, procurement documentation, and so forth. We spoke to a little bit earlier, but valuation methodologies. Is there a reasonable fair market value to the match that you are claiming for a proposal? You oftentimes will need to document that and show the logic of how you arrived at that number. Key point here, good tracking systems, they protect and I would say enhance future funding opportunities and grant seeking. So get those systems in place and it'll serve you well into the future. Next slide. Common mistakes that we see are double counting, double dipping in contributions, using unallowable federal funds, when they misclassify state funds that may be federal pass-through, and those are really federal funds, overestimating volunteer value or overestimating volunteer hours, waiting too long to secure match, failing to document in-kind support, or simply pursuing a grant that's too big for them at this point in time, and you do not have the operational capacity for that grant. Another thing that I'll say that I think is really important is, as you're putting your match strategy together, some funding opportunities do require that you have cash match in hand. I've also seen many scenarios where simply planning out your match strategy in the future, saying we're going to apply to the ABC Foundation for $50,000 in July of 2026, followed by the DEF Foundation for additional 50,000, and that will complete our funding stack and our match requirement. I've seen that work. We see that more with private funders, kind of lower level government funders. Federal, that often doesn't work, but we have seen it. And so even just planning it out, that could be the difference between a successful and a not successful proposal. Next slide.
Oh, wait, John, I have a question real quick on these slides.
Yeah.
One also from the last one, can you talk about maybe what a tracking system looks like? And for your last one, can you maybe talk about how a rural organization can make their operational capacity look okay, look firm when it is small? Like, should they name the systems? Should they show they have a system set up? Like, how can you overcome sometimes this operational capacity, knowing that our rural organizations oftentimes they can't hire somebody else? So is there a way when you're writing or doing these securing matches that they can acknowledge that they have operational capacity smallness, right, but still show, hey, we still have the ability to track and stuff? So maybe talking about those tracking systems and overcoming that match mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if you are a small organization, there are tools, there's best practice kind of standard types of tools and processes to track your match over the course of a project. Funders want to see that you're able to take their award, whether that's programmatic or it's capital, and that you're able to segregate that from the rest of your funds elsewhere, to segregate accounts. In accounting, that's known as a chart of accounts, that you will be establishing a particular account specifically for that project, so that when you're going through your QuickBooks, when you're going over your finances, you are able to readily identify, this is what we received from this project, here's where we're at in terms of spend down and things like that. You don't necessarily have to have an in-house person to do that. Those are things that can be contracted through an accountant, a bookkeeper, things like that. But what funders want to see is that as soon as they hand you a large award, are you able to create a specific segregated classification and tracking process for that account over the next 1 year, 2 year, 5 years? And are you able to sufficiently track the spend down, the expenditures of that project, and any match requirements, and to document them? So for rural municipalities, thankfully, they often have even a finance person without necessarily a robust finance department. It could just be one individual that's doing that. It could be the town manager that's doing that. For nonprofits, just because that is in and of itself, that's a certain IRS designation type of status. There's financial processes that you kind of naturally have with that classification, and so they are certainly able to do that. But hand it over to the professionals, to the folks who have done this before or are following best practice for tracking these awards over the course of the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Now, here's a group exercise, and this is for a nonprofit type of project. This is a community facility project, a workforce and childcare center. Let's say that there's a total project cost of $5 million. Some discussion questions I want to bring forward here are, what funding sources could support this kind of project? Really, what would your capital stack probably look like to sort of integrate what we learned here today? What could count as match? What resources could your nonprofit, could your agency leverage to complete the match requirements? What partnerships would strengthen competitiveness? And what documentation would be required? I want everybody to just think about this and conceptualize this for right now. But like we were discussing earlier, I think that it is in the most likely scenario here is that a capital stack, $4 or $5 million project. So you're crossing that threshold into a medium large scale project. Federal funding would mostly be the largest leveraged funds for that project, followed by state, followed by county, followed by city, if you're able to leverage those funds, and there are funding opportunities available, with everything kind of scaling down to private and corporate. What documentation would be required? A funder would want to make sure that you have award letters, that you have received those contributions from those other funders at various government levels and private levels, and that they are not allocated elsewhere. You are avoiding double dipping. And also that you are not confusing and conflating classification types of funding. So you're not leveraging federal to meet federal requirements for match, state for state, so on and so forth. It's really something that it seems complicated in practice, but once you learn the mechanics and the standards of how this works, it does become easier for sure. So next slide. So what are the final takeaways here? Really, matching funds are one of the key sustainability indexes that folks are looking for, funders are looking for in the funding landscape that we have today. Match demonstrates commitment and readiness, but it also really forces you into a position of looking at organizational sustainability, looking beyond just the project sustainability, but more for the organization as a whole. Strong match improves competitiveness, whether explicitly called out in the rubric or otherwise. And capital stacks, piecing together various funding from different levels of government and private corporate. It's common for projects of $2 million or more, and I would say even for smaller projects. In-kind support can be extremely valuable, but you must be able to document. And documentation and compliance are one of the key system pieces that funders want to see you address. Match strategy is both a financing skill and a partnership strategy. So really, the strongest organizations and the strongest projects are ones that have a funding ecosystem that they're bringing to the table, not just a single grant that they are relying on. If you're relying on a single grant, a single funder, what happens if that funding opportunity does not come out next year? What happens if that funder eviscerates and closes up shop? That directly threatens the sustainability of your program or your project. Next slide. And so some questions and discussion. I want to take any and all questions that you guys have that you guys are bringing to the table here and want addressed, but some standard questions that certainly happy to address. What matching challenges has your organization faced? What systems still need development, and what opportunities are you preparing for that you may have some questions on, but happy to take any and all questions. And this is kind of the Q&A portion of the presentation. So let's open it up.
Real quick, John, I'm going to jump in and speak to Carnell's question from the very beginning about his the best strategies and grant opportunities for launching a workforce development program. And some of those, Carnell, is as John was just discussing, especially when it comes to workforce, those are partners. Those workforce grants are full of that. So most of the successful projects you're talking about collaboration with schools, community colleges, industry partners, and sponsors, especially depending on what that workforce is going to be. So the best strategy is to begin those conversations early, is to start getting everybody to the table. Depending on the workforce grant, it could be a nonprofit who's applying, or it might have to be the college, or it might have to be somebody else. So you really want to get everybody in early, define those roles and responsibilities. And then from there, that also starts the important discussion of the budget and administration. Who's going to carry it? Who's getting the money when you get it? Who's going to get that administration budget? budget, who's going to be the lead applicant, things like that. The second most important thing, especially, is figuring out which partners are already engaged in your regional area. As these funds become smaller and smaller and harder to secure, thanks, John, for helping us learn how we're going to secure those. If you're already starting something from scratch and there's already something happening in the area, it's really integral to get in on those and possibly maybe expand another program that's already going, because that is less competitive. That's now a regional effort, a growing effort, which is more likely to be funded than an entirely new project that might already have regional buy-in and things happening. So it's also really important to find out who's already doing what. And then, of course, as John was talking about, is just figuring out who mainly funds workforce. And John can speak to a few. There's about 2 or 3 agencies who mainly do this kind of work here, and getting in there early, understanding they usually do these grants, year after year. So understanding what it looks like, understanding the projects they've already funded, what the requirements are, and things like that. So make sure that your idea, your scope, and alignment are kind of already there and understanding it.
Yeah, great points, Robin. I would like to point out that there's a question in the chat related to workforce about WIOA. WIOA is typically a federally funded program, so put together your match strategy appropriately, knowing that. Like Robin said, Department of Labor, Economic Development Administration, those are
Governor's office.
Yep. So from federal to state, and then yes, I would say governor's office, DES, things of that type at the state level, so on and so forth. Those are your usual suspects for funding workforce types of projects.
And it looks like we have.
And then
another
I see
question.
here from
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, from Shirley for the childcare, the group exercise about the childcare. Is what I'm gearing up for. I'd love more specific information about approaching the potential partners. Do you have some literature or advice about that? Yeah, absolutely. And Shirley, do you mind me asking, are you building a new childcare facility? That's probably the most important question before I answer. Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, childcare facilities, and this is more grant seeking type of advice in general. But childcare is the fastest rising household expense that there is today. It is outpacing college. It is outpacing housing as well. So developing need. What is the need for childcare? It's something that is woefully under-resourced. And then additionally, it has major economic impact implications as far as working families. So I would say looking at your geography, your area, and putting those things together as you have conversations with these funders, and really before you dive into the mechanics of how does your money work and how much money do you have available. If you're able to paint a very strong picture as far as need, that is going to drive your conversations. But then as you speak to each funder at any level of government or any level of private, I would ask them for any strategy advice they would have in putting together your capital stack. It's likely that these funders, that they have done similar projects in the past. They know how other projects have leveraged funds to complete a capital stack for what I'm assuming is a medium to large scale project. And also the timing of those opportunities, maybe even where they want to fund. If they have a knack for funding rural types of agencies and projects, especially related to childcare, that's what I would start with, is developing your need and then putting together sort of your roster of how you're going to complete your capital stack and building the timing out of when you're applying and how much you're applying for.
Yes, and I'd also like to throw in on that, as you're gathering those resources, is to also be sure that you're tying that kind of project back to your local and regional economic development opportunities or strategies, such as your regional planning documents, city or town planning documents, especially. I know that in some areas, especially for childcare, First Things First Arizona has done many studies that absolutely specifically target the younger K through 6 and their needs and the regional needs for childcare and how it affects their workforce. So as you're doing all that, it's really important also to really dive into anything that any studies have been done in your area that will show the need. And then secondary is finding regional and local to state goals and strategies that what you're doing applies to. And those will all kind of really help shape and focus how you can make this program move forward. Who's interested? Why is there a need? Can I prove this? All of the strengths that John is talking about. Those should all be kind of the first things that you're looking for, is to document the need before you document why you need the money.
Yeah, great points, Robin. Great points. One more thing that I'll mention is for projects in general that tie into what Robin discussed just a second ago, as far as long-term planning, priorities for economic development, things of that nature. Sometimes we see organizations, instead of going the grant path, they may reach out to their legislators or local leaders and request a direct allocation of funding. If you are squarely addressing a major need that's called out in planning and economic impact types of documentation, those can be used for your capital stack as well. It does not just need to be grants. Direct allocation is also a resource that you can leverage.
Well, considering time, I just want to insert here and say thanks to everyone for attending, and for those who are watching the recording further. You already know that we will be sending this out and making sure that everyone gets the content as well as any additional materials. If you looked at your Humanitics page, there was a worksheet attached to that, kind of a checklist based off of what John has put together here. And a huge thank you to John for all of this very helpful advice on seeking and securing grant match funding. But do know that we will continue this series. I just shared in the chat the link to the rest of the series. We have 10 more workshops to go. So if any of those topics interest you, please register. Otherwise, these will all be available forevermore on our local learning lab, which is on the Local First Arizona website. So we will be sure to follow up. And 2, we will be sending a survey so that if there are additional topics that we're not going to cover, make sure to share that with us. Some opportunities for improvement as we continue to try to make workshops that will help folks build their capacity. So thank you so much. And thanks again to John.
Thank you, guys.